In the first 6 months of the Pacific War, Japanese Zero pilots achieved a kill ratio estimated at better than 12-1 against Allied aircraft, 12-1. Allied pilots were ordered not to dogfight the Zero, not to chase it, not to follow it into a turn. They were ordered to run. 18 months later, the same aircraft was being called a flying coffin by the men who flew it. This is the complete biography of the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, the engineer who created it against impossible odds, the pilots who made it legendary, and the fatal decisions hidden inside its beautiful design that made its fall as fast as its rise. In 1937, a 34-year-old engineer named Jiro Horikoshi received an assignment that his rivals considered impossible. The Imperial Japanese Navy had issued a specification for a carrier-based fighter with unprecedented range, maneuverability, and speed. Nakajima, Japan's other major aircraft manufacturer, declined the specification as impossible. Horikoshi accepted it. Born in 1903 in Fukuoka, Japan, Horikoshi had studied aeronautical engineering at the University of Tokyo and dedicated his life to aircraft design. He was meticulous, obsessive about weight, and he understood something fundamental that his rivals did not. That if Japan could not build a more powerful engine, and it couldn't, the only path to performance was to make the aircraft lighter than anything that had ever flown in combat. Every gram mattered, every rivet, every wire. Horikoshi's team deliberately reduced the safety factors on many structural components and made use of a new aluminum-zinc alloy called Super Ultra Duralumin, with remarkable strength at a fraction of the weight of conventional materials. He was not building an aircraft, he was building a compromise, one that would make Japan the most feared air power in the Pacific, and one that would kill thousands of Japanese pilots when that compromise was exposed. The specification Horikoshi received in 1937 was not just demanding, it was contradictory. The Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service called for a fighter that could reach speeds up to 310 miles per hour at 13,120 feet, climb to 9,140 feet in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, while being armed with two 20mm cannons, two 7.7mm machine guns, and two 60-pound bombs, and equipped with a full radio and direction finder. Speed, climb rate, firepower, range, all in a carrier-based aircraft that had to fold its wings, survive arrested landings, and operate from a moving deck in open ocean. Something had to give. Horikoshi believed that the greatest flaw in his design was its use of a relatively low-power aircraft engine, the 950 horsepower Nakajima Sakai. Japan's limited access to alloying metals caused a shortage of the high-tensile steel used in more powerful American aircraft engines. So Horikoshi made a decision that would define everything that followed. No armor protection for the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no structural redundancy. The very design features Horikoshi used to achieve the required performance, lightweight, minimum armor, non-self-sealing tanks, would in time allow opposing American fighters to gain the upper hand. He knew the risks. He built it anyway, because the alternative was an aircraft that could not meet the mission. The prototype made its maiden flight on April 1, 1939. Production began in 1940. The year 1940 was the 2600th anniversary of the ascension to the throne of Japan's legendary first emperor, hence the Zero designation. What Horikoshi created was unlike anything flying in 1940. He created an aircraft of almost poetic lightness, with a wing loading so low that the Zero could outturn anything in the sky. The Zero's range was extraordinary. It was achieved through an extremely light yet strong structure and the provision of a jettisonable centerline external fuel tank. The wings themselves served as integrated fuel tanks whose large volume gave the aircraft its remarkable reach. A Zero could fly over 1,600 miles on a single mission. No Allied carrier fighter could come close. Its armament was formidable. Two 7.7mm machine guns in the fuselage and two 20mm cannons in the wings. The 20mm cannons were devastating at close range, but there was a hidden weakness in those cannons. Although the 20mm cannon shells packed a lot of punch, the guns had a rather low muzzle velocity, reducing their accuracy. They also had a rather low rate of fire. A Zero pilot needed to be close, patient, and precise. In 1941, against unprepared opponents, that was enough. In 1943, against pilots who had been trained specifically to counter the Zero, it would not be. When Japan went to war in December 1941, the Zero had already been flying combat missions over China for more than a year. Its pilots were not new. They were the finest naval aviators in the world, veterans of hundreds of aerial engagements, trained in an imperial system that valued quality over quantity. In the first 6 months of the Pacific War, Zero pilots achieved a kill ratio estimated at better than 12 to 1 against Allied aircraft, a dominance that stunned Western observers who had not seen the Zero in combat and had badly underestimated Japanese aviation. Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. Everywhere the Zero appeared, Allied aircraft fell. American pilots flying P-40 Warhawks and F-4F Wildcats quickly learned the same lesson. Never follow a Zero into a turn. The Zero would simply outmaneuver anything chasing it at low speed. The overwhelming successes of the Zero during the first 6 months of the war stunned Western observers who catapulted the Zero to the ranks of a superplane flown by super pilots. This was not too much of an exaggeration in 1942. The Zero was indeed superior to every fighter it faced, land-based or carrier-borne, and the Japanese Navy's elite force of experienced pilots was equal to or better than any in the world. For 18 months, the Pacific belonged to the Zero. June 1942, the Battle of Midway. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers in 3 days. With them went hundreds of its most experienced naval aviators, men who had trained for years, who had accumulated thousands of flight hours, who understood the Zero's strengths and limitations better than anyone. They could not be replaced, not in months, not in years. The experienced pre-war pilots who had made the Zero fearsome were gone, replaced by hastily trained replacements flying an increasingly obsolescent aircraft. And the Americans were learning. The Thatch Weave, a tactic developed by Commander John Thatch, allowed pairs of Wildcat fighters to protect each other against the Zero's superior maneuverability. Never alone, always in pairs, never turning with the Zero, always using speed and altitude. By 1943, new American fighters began arriving in the Pacific. The F-6F Hellcat, the F-4U Corsair, heavier, faster in a dive, better armed, and critically, with armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks that the Zero had sacrificed for performance. A single incendiary round into a Zero's unprotected fuel tank was often enough. By 1944, the Zero was hopelessly outmatched. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, American pilots shot down over 300 Japanese aircraft, mostly Zeros, in what American aviators would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The machine that had terrified the Pacific in 1941 was being massacred in 1944. And here is where we need to correct one of the most repeated myths in Pacific War history. On June 4, 1942, during the Japanese attack on Dutch Harbor, Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga crash-landed his Zero on a Kuton island in the Aleutians. The nearly undamaged aircraft, the first intact Zero captured by American forces, was discovered on July 10, 1942. For decades, history books have repeated the same story. The Americans captured the Zero, studied it, and used those secrets to design the F-6F Hellcat, the fighter that would destroy the Zero. It is a perfect story. It is also wrong. The Hellcat was flying before the Zero was recovered. The XF-6F-1 first flew on June 26, 1942, before Koga's Zero had even been found. By the time the Zero arrived in San Diego for testing in August 1942, 2 models of the F-6F had already flown. The Akutan Zero affected Hellcat air combat tactics, but had nothing to do with its development. The perpetuation of this myth is an affront to the genius of the Grumman design team, who created the Hellcat on their own terms. What the Akutan Zero DID do was equally important. 24 test flights over 25 days revealed key weaknesses, sluggish roll rates at high speeds, vulnerability to engine cutoff in steep dives, and overall fragility compared to emerging American fighters. That intelligence saved American pilots' lives, but the Hellcat was already coming. The Zero's fate was already decided. Jiro Horikoshi lived until 1982. He watched his creation go from the most feared fighter in the world to a symbol of Japan's defeat. He personally opposed the war and was deeply troubled that his creation became such a potent weapon. After the war, he expressed regret that his engineering brilliance had contributed to so much destruction. The Zero story is not a story of failure. 10,939 Zeros were built between 1939 and 1945, more than any other Japanese aircraft of the war. It dominated Pacific skies for 18 months, with a level of aerial superiority that few aircraft in history have matched. But it is also a story of what happens when a design philosophy reaches its limits. The Zero was built on a single idea, that lightness could compensate for everything, for armor, for engine power, for structural strength. That idea was brilliant in 1940. It was lethal by 1943. The same qualities that made it unbeatable in a dogfight made it unable to survive the industrial war that the United States brought to the Pacific. The Zero did not lose because it was a bad aircraft. It lost because the war changed, and the Zero could not change with it. The Zero's story connects directly to the next episode of Iron Histories. The F-6F Hellcat that replaced it, the aircraft with a 19-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese fighters, is one of the most efficient killing machines ever built for carrier warfare. That story is coming. But first, I want to know what you think. Horikoshi made a choice: sacrifice protection for performance. Given Japan's industrial limitations in 1937, was there any other option? Or was the Zero's fall inevitable from the moment the first rivet was placed? Leave your argument below. If this is the military history you've been looking for, subscribe to Iron Histories. Every war machine has a biography.